The story of Andrea Yates is not just a crime story. It is a slow-burning psychological descent. A deeply unsettling unraveling of reality that culminated in one of the most haunting tragedies in modern American history. And to truly understand what happened inside that quiet suburban home in Houston on June 20, 2001,
you have to step far beyond the headlines, beyond the word crime, and into the fragile, fractured interior of a mind
overtaken by forces it could no longer control. Because this was not a story that began in a single moment of violence. It began years earlier, quietly, almost invisibly, in the form of small warning signs that were either misunderstood, underestimated, or tragically overlooked, and those warning signs would slowly build into something far more dangerous
than those around her may have realized at the time. Before the story became widely known, she was seen by many as a caring mother,
a deeply religious woman raising 5 children with her husband Rusty Yates, living a life that outwardly reflected discipline, structure, and strong faith. Yet beneath that carefully constructed surface, there was an ongoing internal battle. One that had already manifested in severe episodes of postpartum depression and psychosis after the births of her children.
Conditions that are not simply sadness or emotional strain, but can involve hallucinations, delusions, and a complete break from reality itself.
Doctors had diagnosed her, treated her, and even hospitalized her, and at multiple points there were clear warnings, explicit concerns voiced by medical professionals that Andrea should not be left alone with her children, that her mental state posed a serious risk. But like so many tragedies involving mental illness, the line between temporary stability and catastrophic relapse proved dangerously thin. In the months leading up to that June morning, Andrea's condition began to deteriorate again, and this time, the signs were even more alarming. She withdrew almost entirely, speaking very little, neglecting basic daily activities, and showing an increasing obsession with religious themes that took on a dark and distorted tone, where concepts of sin, punishment, and eternal damnation became central to her thoughts. She began to believe
that she was failing as a mother, not just in a practical sense, but in a spiritual one.
That her very existence was corrupting her children, condemning them to a fate worse than death. And in the distorted logic of psychosis, this belief did not feel irrational. It felt urgent, necessary, even righteous. Imagine living in a mental state where your love for your children becomes twisted into fear for their souls.
Where every moment they remain alive feels like a step closer to eternal suffering, and where the only perceived escape
from that fate is an act so unthinkable that it defies the most basic human instinct to protect. This is the terrifying power of conditions like postpartum psychosis, a rare but severe psychiatric emergency that can completely override a person's perception of reality. On the morning of June 20, 2001,
the fragile balance finally collapsed. Andrea waited until her husband left for work, and until the brief window
when no other adult was present in the house. And in that span of time, something irreversible took hold. There was no chaotic outburst, no visible rage, no external trigger that could be pointed to as the cause, only a quiet, methodical progression toward an act that would shock the nation. She filled the bathtub,
and one by one, she brought her children into the bathroom. John, Paul, Luke, Mary, and finally Noah, the oldest.
And what followed was not a moment of confusion, but a sequence of actions carried out with a chilling sense of purpose, as if guided by a belief that this was the only way to save them. Investigators would later describe the scene
as both horrifying and eerily calm, with the children placed carefully on a bed after each drowning,
covered as if they were simply sleeping, a detail that suggests not chaos, but a deeply disturbed attempt to impose order. And meaning on the act, the most haunting moment, perhaps, comes from reports that Noah, the oldest, tried to run, tried to ask what was happening, tried to survive, And yet even that instinct for life could not break through the delusion
that had consumed his mother. When it was over, Andrea did something that continues to baffle and disturb.
She did not hide, she did not flee, she did not attempt to escape responsibility. Instead, she called 911 and calmly reported what she had done, and then called her husband, speaking in a tone so controlled and detached that it sent chills through those who later heard the recordings. When authorities arrived, they encountered a scene
that was almost surreal in its stillness. A home that looked like any other on the outside,
but inside carried a situation so profound that it would echo across the entire country. As the investigation unfolded, Andrea spoke with investigators. She believed she was saving her children from hell. By ending their lives, she was granting them eternal peace. And this explanation, as horrifying as it is, reveals the core of the case. Not a motive rooted in anger or resentment,
but in a delusion so powerful that it redefined right and wrong. The case quickly became a focal point for national discussion,
raising difficult questions about Andrea Yates's mental and emotional state at the time. Failed by those around her, and by a system that did not adequately protect her or her children. During her first trial in 2002, the prosecution argued that Andrea knew what she was doing was wrong,
pointing to her actions after the crime and her awareness of potential consequences, while the defense argued she was legally insane,
unable to distinguish between right and wrong due to her psychotic state. The courtroom became a stage where two interpretations of reality were presented, and the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution, finding her guilty of capital murder and sentencing her to life in prison. For many, this verdict seemed to bring closure, but beneath the surface, there were cracks in the case that would soon widen. A key moment came when it was revealed that expert testimony used by the prosecution included inaccurate claims about Andrea's exposure to a fictional episode of Law and Order, suggesting she may have been influenced by media portrayals of similar crimes, a detail that turned out to be false, and called into question the fairness of the trial. This revelation led to the conviction being overturned.
And in 2006, Andrea faced a second trial, one that would take a different approach to her mental state.
This time, the jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity, acknowledging that her actions were the result of severe mental illness, rather than criminal intent, and she was committed to a state mental health facility, where she remains. The outcome reignited intense debate across the United States, with some arguing that justice had not been served.
That 5 innocent lives had been lost, and someone must be held fully accountable, while others saw the verdict
as a necessary recognition of the profound impact of mental illness, a case where punishment alone could not address the reality. The Andrea Yates case became more than a legal story. It became a lens through which society examined its understanding of mental health, particularly in the context of motherhood, where expectations can be overwhelming and the stigma can prevent individuals from getting help.
It exposed systemic failures, from gaps in medical follow-up care to the challenges families face in managing severe psychiatric conditions.
And it raised critical questions about how warning signs are identified and acted upon. Even today, the case continues to be studied, and not because it offers clear answers, but because it highlights the complexities of the human mind and the devastating consequences. There is something uniquely haunting about this story, something that lingers long after the details are known.
Perhaps because it forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that the line between stability and collapse can be far thinner
than we would like to believe, and that even in the most ordinary settings, something can go terribly, irreversibly wrong. The tragedy of Andrea Yates is not just in the lives that were lost, but in the realization that this was a preventable disaster. One shaped by mental illness and missed opportunities, serving as a stark reminder that mental health is a societal responsibility, one that carries consequences far beyond any single family, echoing into how we respond to the most vulnerable among us.